is
Of course.
twice as important as anybody else's.
Of course.
No, it's because you ate twice as much food for Passover.
I'm eating so much junk food for Passover. That's all I eat. Good morning, everybody. Hag Sameach. Happy Passover. Welcome to our Kol HaMoed, our Passover discussion. Funny enough, we're not going to discuss Passover today. We've done it a couple weeks in a row because we're going to talk about something that is very pertinent to today, but probably won't be that pertinent to us in a few months. And that, of course, is the Israeli elections. We're going to do this today as an election update day. So for those of you who don't know, Israel just did their fourth election, inside 14 months or so, 12 months, which is a very strange thing. Never happened in the history of Israel. But unlike American politics, and we're going to talk about the differences first, in Israel, the government can fall. That doesn't mean that Israel's taken over. It just means if the government falls, they have a new election and they elect a new prime minister and new ministers. So let's say our Congress couldn't get a budget passed. The day by a certain deadline, if they don't meet that deadline, then we go into elections and we re-elect the entire Congress and president again. And so the current administration's been around for, 6 weeks. I'm exaggerating, but for almost such a little amount of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the Israeli system itself, and then we're going to talk about why it's in such a lock again. If you don't know what's going on, Israel's probably going to have a fifth. This was our fourth or fifth. One more. This is our fifth. They're going to have a sixth election. Most likely, it's not for sure, in a couple of months. Why is this possible? And what is the difference? Well, just to make sure we know, Israel has a parliamentary government, much more similar to England. In other words, when you go to vote, you're not voting for your senator, you're not voting for your congressperson, you're not voting for the president. All you're voting for is a party. That's all you vote for. And this is for the whole country because they don't have states. It's too small to have like states here. You vote for the government of the country and that's it. I mean, you can vote, you'll have city elections, but in general, you vote for a party. So when I go to vote, I'm voting for Likud or Meretz or Shas or a new blue and white. I just vote, I get one vote, it goes to the party. If a party receives a certain percentage of the vote, I think it's around 3%. It differs depending on how many people vote. Then they will get at least 2 people into the Knesset. So let's say we're all a party, and our party is the Larry Rosendorf fan club party. And it sounds ridiculous, but Israel's had ridiculous parties. They had the taxi service party. They've had all kinds of crazy parties. It's only crazy until Larry, who is super popular in Israel, 3.02% of the population votes for the Larry Rosendorf fan club party. That means we get 2 seats because you have to get a minimum of at least 2 seats in. So that means Larry Rosendorf's party is in the Knesset. Congratulations, Larry. And how do we know who's going to represent Larry Rosendorf's party in Knesset? Well, Larry Rosendorf's party has how many seats? 2. So every party has to have a list in order of people who are going to go into Knesset if they go down that list. In our party, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 people on the list. Larry, Noel. Who else is on the party? Michael, Jeff, and me. Did I forget anybody? Okay, I'm forgetting to say Jane, Larry. I don't have everybody on the list. Okay.
Yeah, you forgot the dissident.
Okay. And so we have, there we go. Okay, now see everybody. We have How many people here? That's 8 people now. 9, 8 people. I'll go to gallery view. There we go. All right. We now have 8 people on. So we write the list. Larry obviously is number 1. Jane is number 2. And then Michael's 3. And we go on the rest of us. Who is in the Knesset?
Jane and
Just
Larry.
Larry and Jane.
Yeah.
Because we only get the first 2. We're like 1.0001% from getting a third vote. Michael, you're out. Good try. So just Larry and Jane are in. That's all we get. We get Larry and Jane. That's it. So how does the government work? There are 120 total seats in the government. Okay? If you want to be in charge, you have to have 61. That's what you have to have. All right, so 61 seats are what you need. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to Wikipedia, and actually I go to Wikipedia, or let's go here, share screen. Does everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the latest. Is this the latest one? Yeah. This is the latest one. Does everybody see?
Yeah.
All right. So this is where it, let's see here. So right here, you see that line? Anybody above the line made it in. Anybody below the line didn't. The New Economic Party, which is led by a 50-year-old economist, didn't make it in. It's a new party. You can see that if I go farther down the list, there's a lot of parties. See all that? Does everybody see the parties?
Mm-hmm.
There's a Human Dignity Party. There's a Social Leadership Party. There's a Social Bang for Pensioner Party. There's a Jewish Heart. There is a Pirate Party, which got 1,369. So there are a lot of parties, but only the ones above this got in. Okay. So we have, is Karen there, Stuart? Karen there? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. How many people go back to gallery view? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have 8 people in our group. So we would be closest to blue and white. So for our 8 people, we needed almost 300,000 votes to get in. So everybody understand that so far? Okay, so now we see the parties that are in. You need how many to be in charge of the government?
61.
61. You need 61. The number 1 party, again, as has been for many years, is Likud. And how many votes did they get? They got...
Well, they got 1 million, but they got 24% of the vote.
They got 24%, which is about a fourth. So they got a total of 30 votes. That's it.
Right.
30 seats.
Mhm.
That's a net loss of 7 from last time. You can see on this side. So it sounds pretty impressive. They got 30 seats. Does that mean they won the election?
No.
Not at all. Because it doesn't
yeah.
matter how many seats you get. It matters how many seats your bloc gets. And you need 61 seats to be in charge. That means Likud doesn't even have half the number needed. So they have to go to these other parties and find 31 seats. And they have to make a coalition. Michael.
I just have a historical question. I was going to look it up, but I didn't get around to it. In the infancy of Israel, when they had elections, didn't the Labor Party usually get more than 50% of the vote?
Until from 1948 till 1977, the Labor Party was in control of the government the whole time.
Yeah.
They didn't always get 50% of the vote themselves, but they got more than 50% of the bloc.
Okay.
So Labor was always the largest party. That's a party of Ben Gurion, Moshe
Yeah.
Dayan, Yitzhak Rabin, and Golda Meir. And they controlled the government for 29 years straight. Since that time, though, it went back and forth in the 80s and 90s. But for the last almost 15 years, it's been Likud. For the most part, it's been Likud for the last 25 years.
Rabbi, could you quickly just give us a 2-sentence synopsis maybe of each of the parties?
We're going to go down exactly what we're going to do now.
Great, okay.
Now, what you have to understand is parties don't always, they may work together for one reason, but they may not have a lot in common. So, for instance, during the last election, Blue and White and Likud made a coalition together. But because the Blue and White party was partially created to be an anti-Netanyahu party, when their leader made a deal with Likud, half the party left, and they lost a lot of their, and another party split off. So, because of that, Blue and White, which was last time, I think the number one was with its coalition was number one last time, is now number 4. So you have to find somebody who you're going to work with. Who does Likud usually work with? There's a lot of different ones, but often, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to each political party and you'll see some are religious, some are not. Yesh Atid is a non-religious party. It is a central, it's by Yair Lapid, who I think many of us have heard of. Middle class, it's for the middle class. Shas is, of course, the Orthodox Sephardic Haredi party. It does have non-Sephardic Jews. It is a very powerful religious party. Let me just...
Rabbi, I'm sorry. Yesh Atid, is that a new party or?
It's fairly new. It's been around. It's the Lapid who left years ago Labor, I think.
I'm sorry, what is it again? It's a political.
Yesh Atid. It just means there is a future.
Central
So,
political party.
I went to Wikipedia so we could easily click on anything. So it's founded in 2012. Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's basically an anti-Orthodox party. It's basically we don't want the Orthodox to have all these exceptions party. We're afraid, we're paying taxes, and we're kind of holding them they're holding us hostage. Blue and White was, Shas is, of course, the Ovadia Yosef party. Blue and White is a centrist liberal party. So this would be considered the modern Labor in many respects, the biggest liberal party. Yamina, which means right, is a right-wing party. So obviously, because their name is Yamin, which means right. So that's really easy. So they are an interesting party because of alliances as also. If you look at there, it was originally one thing, became another, and then it kind of switched back and forth. But it's a very important party right now because it's a Zionist, religious Zionist party. So Israeli Labor Party, which is the famous party, actually barely made it into the Knesset last time, was the last party got in. This time they did a little bit better. United Torah Judaism, of course, is an Orthodox religious group. Yisrael Beitenu is a secular right-wing, non-religious party. It was a very big deal from originally with all the Russian immigrants. It's not as big anymore. Religious Zionist Party obviously is a religious Zionist party. It's not the Haredi, it's the more modern Orthodox. The Joint List is the New Arab Party. that before was the Arab parties have basically split into two. So this one, as you can see, lost 5 seats because the new Arab Party, which is the United Arab Party, got 4. So does everybody see that? New Hope, non-religious, right wing, not too right. Merits is a non-religious left wing. And then those are all the parties that are in. So now,
List.
basically right now it is, I think Likud has about 59 seats if it goes through a traditional one. So what does that mean? Let's see, clear all drawings. Means if you clear all drawings, 1 second. Okay. 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 So if we have Likud, and if we put the right-wing parties or the religious parties, Shas, United Torah Judaism, religious. So if we put those parties, the religious parties, together, we've got 39, 46, 52. This is not a guarantee because a lot of them don't want to work with them right now. That's 52 right now. Then you add Yamina. That is 59. Yamina is another right-leaning party. So that would be 59 if he had those again. That doesn't matter. 59 is you might as well have 0. 59 gets you nothing. 59 means you lose in the 7th game of the World Series as opposed to losing in the 4th. It's 4 games, but in the end you lose. So that is where they are. Okay.
Wow.
On the other side, you've got blue and white. Yesh Atid, who might go to Itham, Israel Labor Party, some of these centrist parties, and maybe Merits. So if you added all these parties, 25, 32, 39, 45. I'm missing one. That's 45, New Hope. 51. So you're talking about 51 for the other side. And the Arab parties have been kind of left out. There's kind of been a understood feeling or law that you do not work with the Arab parties. You do not allow the Arab parties into the governments. Now, when it comes to phraseology, if they say in the government, it doesn't mean you're on this list. It means you're one of the 60 plus parties that are in charge. So, for instance, the Arab Party last time got 11 seats, but they're not in the governments because they're not part of the 61 plus who were chosen to form a government. So now what's happened is there's a couple ways the government will fall. One is very simple. We are, how many of us are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can't see everybody for some reason. Give me 1 second. Stretch out. Who else is on here? Let's see here. 1 second. Go over here. All right, now I can see. All right. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We got 8 people. So that means we need 5 people to form a government. The government's going to be Noel, Michael, Stuart, and Flossie, because Flossie and Jeff aren't getting along. So we are the party. Now, what happens is Stuart gets upset at me. I don't like that sweater you're wearing, Robert. And so he decides, Stuart, what are you going to do then?
I'm leaving the party.
He's leaving the party. Now, how many are in the party? 4. 4 is not enough. That shows the incredible amount of power Stuart has, even though he's only one person. Because if Likud had 61 seats, and that included, let's say what's so small, it included New Hope. New Hope was only 6 seats. But if Netanyahu had a coalition of 66 seats, New Hope can say, you give me what I want, or I'm leaving. And if they leave, they take their 6 seats, and Netanyahu has, instead of 66, he has 60. So you can tell the incredible power given to small parties, because they can just leave, and then guess what you have to do? You either have to form another government, or you have to have elections again. Or if you can't get everybody to pass a budget, you have elections again. And so basically we've had elections every 2 years, and except for recently where it's every 6 months or every couple of months. Who is working with who now? Well, the religious parties are not happy with Netanyahu, so they may not be coming in. You know, he'd usually, be with Yamina for sure. And he'd be with Yamina for sure. And probably Israel Beitenu. And so those would be kind of his main, and then the religious parties.
Sorry to come in so late. We had problems getting on, but we're here.
Sorry, Ron. So these would be, and again, party names change all the time too. So this is where we are today. As of now, it doesn't matter that Likud got 30 seats because they don't have 61 in their block. However, the president, which is not an elected position. The president of the Knesset is basically an honorary position, but he does have some power. He gets to say who's going to form the government first, who's going to have the first chance. Now, obviously, right now, we would say it's obvious that Likud is going to get the first chance because they have the most seats. But that's not how it works, because the president may say, Likud doesn't really have that much of a chance. Blue and, Yesh Atid has half the votes, but I know they're going to be working with these other parties and they have a better chance to get to 61. So right now, he's going to say Likud, because Likud has the largest block right now. And then when Likud isn't able to do it, then they're going to have another election. I mean, he'll first say, okay, now then Yesh Atid, you have your chance. And when Yesh Atid says they can't do it, they'll have another election. What's going on now is that the ultra-religious, which have always been supportive of Netanyahu, aren't as supportive right now. What do the ultra-religious want? They want control over marriage. They want the ultra-Orthodox don't want to serve in the military. They want to be, they get their stipend every month of money, and they want to have their own school system. They want the country shut down for Shabbat. So all of these things are what they want. So they individually are not that big, but if all the religious parties decide to work together, then you've got a lot. You've got Shas, United Torah,
Yeah.
religious. Where's the fourth one? So you got these 3 right now. So that is a total of 13. So they have 22 seats in their block if they decide to go together. So their 22 seats can make or break. If the left said, listen, religious parties, we're going to give you everything what you want, they would go with the left. So they have a very strong block. What Likud is doing, we don't know because it was just elected. There is now talk. It has been unofficially the rule that you don't try and woo the Arab parties. He is now thinking of talking with them. Why is that so important?
4 votes.
He's got 59 theoretical possible votes plus
Excuse me.
4. That gets him out to 63. So, yes, Jeff.
I'm sorry, Rabbi. I don't understand. What is the difference between the United Arab List and the Joint List? I thought
Good question.
Good question.
They just broke apart. One of them is radical, and let's go to the list and see why they did it, because there is a distinct possibility they're more concerned with rights of the Arabs in the country. I think that's the difference right now. That's the other one.
Rabbi?
yeah, I'm trying to read it.
Yeah, trying to read this.
Wamba, yeah.
Yeah, it's on the table or it's in the kitchen somewhere. I picked it up last night.
So Rabbi, which one is the more radical on the two? The Joint? No.
Two-state solution.
Oh, they still support the two-state solution.
Religious and nationalist, Israeli Arabs.
Religious.
Rabbi, I think you're muted.
I did not know how that happened. I apologize. Did you guys miss all the explanations I gave? It was
Yeah.
brilliant. It was
Yeah.
brilliant.
Please,
It was absolutely brilliant.
read it again now that you practiced.
So now what we're seeing is a very possible 6th election unless somebody can break down. The other thing that, of course, is hanging over the election is Netanyahu is on trial, or about to go on trial, which is causing quite a stir. The tradition is when the prime minister is going to a trial for corruption, he leaves because you can't prosecute a prime minister. That's one of the laws in Israel. So it's happened twice. Ehud Olmert, who did go to jail for a year and a half, about 20 years ago. And then Yitzhak Rabin in the 70s, he didn't go to jail. His crime was much less so. In the 70s, an Israeli prime minister was not allowed to have a bank account outside of Israel.
Correct.
And his wife had a bank account in America. So that's why he left. So it wasn't, it was definitely enough to leave, but not for him to go to jail. It wasn't as egregious as doing something illegal with funds, as happened with Ehud Olmert. So he knows that if he is not elected prime minister, he's going to go to trial and probably thinks he's going to lose. So one of the things he wants to do with his new coalition is create a law saying something like, if you've been prime minister, you can't be prosecuted once you're no longer prime minister, or make an agreement with the basically the attorney general saying, you're not going to prosecute me. That's what one of the things he desperately wants, because he doesn't want to go to jail. And so you have people who are very staunch Netanyahu supporters, and you have some now who think he's in the way. You have some who are very appreciative of what he's done, combating Iran, new alliances with Saudi Arabia, and the way, in some ways, they got the distribution of the COVID inoculations, but he's also had a lot of negatives in the way he's created a rift and the way he handled the inoculations, of course, the trial impending. So he is the most divisive figure right now in Israel, because he's one of those you either love him or you hate him characters in many respects. And it was because of him that Likud did, in many ways, that Likud did so well last time, but also because they lost. Because last time, somebody broke off from his party, Avigdor Lieberman, and took 6 seats with them, and that's why they didn't have enough last time. And Lieberman basically said, I want to be Likud, I just don't want Netanyahu. You don't need to have me as prime minister, just he needs to step down. He didn't, and so he's both the power in Likud, but also the reason they're not winning. So it's one of those ironies. If he leaves, is Likud going to lose a lot of seats? Probably. But will it be able to make a block? Who knows? It's impossible to know these things. So you can see how our country is not as tumultuously distracted by elections as other places are, because we've never had a re-election in our history. No.
Yes, it all seems so corrupt to me, and maybe that's because I live here.
Our system or their system?
Their system, and ours too. But where do all the non-religious people fit into the picture of Israel?
And that is a great question, Noel. It is not a corrupt system, but it can be corrupted, as we know. It's a system, in many ways, it is better than the system we have, because you have smaller groups that have a lot more power. Like you have small groups that have 6 seats that can determine the course of Israel's history, where in America, a very small group of, 5% would have possibly no say at all. So in some ways, it's a better system because the smaller groups have more say. In some ways, it's a worse system because you have this lockjam and you have so much more political maneuvering. So there's not a better or worse system. It's just what happens. It can become very, very corrupt, as we've seen, but it also can be very, very empowering. So really, there's only these are the only religious parties that are in the Knesset right now. So it's 22 seats. So 22 seats obviously is not enough for 61. So if the other groups, which has happened before,
Make nice to the religion.
that's a spotlight color. Where's my color?
What they want.
There you go. So let's say Likud, let's say all of the non-religious parties wanted to come together and say, we want the religious to serve in the military. We don't want to give them money anymore. They have to learn, they have to go to regular education. They easily could do it. I mean, they would have 47 and 15, that's 62 right there. Plus you'd have Israel Labor Party, you'd have Beitel, Israel's Beitel, and you'd have New Hope, and you'd have plenty if that was the only thing you wanted. If you convince everybody in the country the only thing we're going to deal with over the next 4 years is the Orthodox, you could do it. But obviously that has not happened because there are so many other divisions with the economy, but mostly with the settlements. Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, My hand was just,
Right, so
Rabbi,
yes, I can't see somebody calling.
Flossie,
Flossie, sorry, and then, okay, Flossie?
not a problem. Two quick questions. Over the different elections, when the votes came in for Likud, did they increase, did they stay the same, or did they go down?
They went down by 7, and you can look at this column right here.
Oh,
That shows you how it's gone up or down.
Okay. all
It
right,
also shows you that these parties are new.
Okay.
Also shows you that that nobody who was, that any new party, that there's no party that's new to the Knesset right now, it looks like.
Right, none.
And Rabbi,
Yes,
did the religious not serve in the military? If I remember correctly, when we were in Israel, there was an issue, remember it was in the paper about a person who was I guess we call a conscientious observer, didn't feel comfortable being in the military, and they ended up doing community service.
right. So that's one of the debates.
That they can do there.
Yeah, so what you have to understand is there's two types of Orthodox in Israel, although they vote as a bloc. One is what they call the modern Orthodox. Those people do serve in the military, pay taxes. They, especially since the 70s, they have been very, very big supporters of getting jobs and doing stuff. If you go to Israel and you have a tour guide who's Orthodox, he is modern Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox, the black hats, do not serve in the military. They're the ones who are paid to study, basically. So they all, though, tend to work together because it gives them a lot more power. So, for instance, the religious Zionist party right here is not an ultra-Orthodox. If you call yourself a Zionist, you're not an ultra-Orthodox. You're a modern Orthodox.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Larry, a couple of
Larry.
questions. Is everything in the Israeli parliament and the Knesset by a majority of vote then? Is it 61 votes for every bill? Or is it all like our Senate, which, has that filibuster where you need a supermajority for most things?
No, you need to have the government you need those people in power to vote. Yeah, I believe you have to have the 61.
So it's a simple
government, yeah.
majority.
But they will, yeah. But
To pass all the laws.
yeah, but you need to have 61 to be in charge, and that means cabinet positions, defense minister. That's what you need for all of these things. But if you're in the Knesset, you're still voting on all these other things.
And the cabinet positions then are decided upon by the majority.
What they're doing is they're negotiated in the deal.
Oh, by whatever the coalition of the majority.
Right, exactly.
61
Right.
people, but
Yeah, so
they don't usually do not put anyone from the minority into any of the.
right. Well, there'll be some positions they'll get, but they won't be counted as good. So whereas in our country, once President Biden was elected, he then goes and selects his cabinet members or tells people what they're going to do. In Israel, that's all being negotiated right now. So if Netanyahu can get 61, then going in, he says, I've got 61. Larry's going to be defense minister. Jane is minister of education. Michael is, the equivalent of secretary of state. Stu is treasurer. Ron gets to be in charge of the money going to the Orthodox. Noel gets to be in charge of education. So that's how it works. Stuart.
Yeah, if they were not facing the Netanyahu trial issue, which really creates a big interference in the voting, it adds a big sort of special issue. What would be the large issues that are determinant in who enters coalition or not?
It always is. It's determinant upon what's going on in the world. So, for instance, right now in the world, the biggest issue in Israel is Iran. Iran is always the biggest issue. That's always the biggest issue. Their threat is far greater than anything else Israel's facing. However, it is not an issue in the elections because everybody agrees Iran's the bad guy. So whereas it is the most important issue Israel faces when it comes to, when Gantz ran against Netanyahu, a lot of people in America thought Gantz was like pro-Iran. Gantz had the exact same stance on Iran as Netanyahu. The left-wing Meretz party still is anti-Iran. They are not going to, if they somehow miraculously had enough, they will not go and shake the Ayatollah's hand. So that is completely a non-issue when it comes to elections because everybody agrees Iran is bad. Saudi negotiate. Oh, so no. So yeah, I'll go over the issues now. No.
Yeah, which is the most ultra Orthodox party?
There's only one. There's two. You've got United Torah Judaism, which is kind of more Ashkenazic, and Shas. Shas is mostly Sephardic.
So does Shas go around and scream and yell at people who don't follow their rules?
Yes, that's them. So it is in religious and not religious Zionists, United Torah Judaism as well. So those are the guys you see on the news. They're not all like that, obviously. Now, other things that are non-issues, negotiations and peace treaties with Saudi Arabia. Most are, except for maybe a few religious zealots, the right and left are happy to negotiate with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not a natural enemy. They don't have a border that is a threat. So most people are very happy with Netanyahu in doing that. So Morocco, Saudi Arabia, cool. The issues are the ones we think are issues. One is the territories. That's still a huge issue in Israel. That's one of the two biggest ones, probably. If you take out Netanyahu himself, the other is the religious. A lot of people are very worried about what's going to happen in the future with these groups that have 12 kids each, and in 50 years, they will have 50% of the population, and Israel will simply fall apart. So those are two of the major issues right now. How do you view the territories? There are other issues centered around Netanyahu. His relationship with the previous president of the United States is an issue because it is seen by many that you should never cozy up too much to a president of a particular party because no party in America is always in charge. And so the Democratic support of Israel has kind of plummeted even farther, and many people blame his relationship with Netanyahu and Trump. That is not necessarily true, but that's what some people believe.
Rabbi,
Yes. The other issues are the handling of the recent COVID. A lot of people were not happy with the way he handled it. I think they're okay with the way the inoculations went out, but the other stuff, no. Larry.
I was just going to ask, but is one of the big issues really how much you're funding the Orthodox? Is this really an Orthodox versus a more secular kind of election as far as, how much we're going to continue to support them?
That was not this election. That was a previous election. That was the issue. That is always an issue, but it wasn't the only one. There was an election about, not the last one or the one before that, but like the one before that, where was it? I don't remember now. Where that was the issue. But it's always going to change. That's always going to be an issue. The thing is, Netanyahu knows he needs them if he wants a coalition. And so there's always all this involvement. Most of the groups would prefer not to be paying these people not to work and so forth, the ultra-Orthodox, and all the issues with the strikes and the violence they're not supportive of. But, there are other things that are more important. So like the right wants to keep the territories. They want to annex them. The left does not. So some on the right the more central right and the more central left are okay with the two-state solution, but there's a different opinion on how to do it. It looks like Netanyahu is going to even try and negotiate with Abbas a little bit to help convince maybe the United Arab List to join his, or is it to join his party.
Rabbi,
So we'll go, I can't, I guess, Michael, was that my, no, Jeff, and then Noah.
Rabbi, when you got muted, you were about to explain the difference between the United Arab List and the Joint List. I know you put up the thing, but it was hard to read it. I gather that the United Arab List, which would be a major breakthrough because it's never been done before, if Netanyahu tried to make it part of the government, he's always run against that. Are they? I gather they're less radical than the Joint. Is that what it is?
I think, and I'll have to go through because it's like sometimes getting confused. I'm going to put them up here. Second. Sorry, I'm pulling my computer. There we go. Okay.
He's only looking at one Arab group. Am I correct?
So the United Arab List is the group that generally is more concerned with how they're treated in Israel. So how are the Arabs being treated in Israel? They are okay with the two-state solution, but they want equal rights for Muslims in Israel. So that is the Joint List is a little bit more concerned about the territories as well. Now we have to understand these are new parties because until the last couple elections, the Arab parties didn't come together and vote like they are doing now. So this Joint List was the old combination of all of them. The United Arab List is the ones that broke off. It's like anything in politics, things change, and the Muslims are figuring this out, that they can have some political power if they work together. But as we know, we may all get together for something, but eventually we may break apart because if all Christians could unite, they would rule the world. If all Muslims could unite, they could rule the world. If all Israeli parties united, the Messiah would be here.
Okay, well put.
So it's got to, there's so many issues, political issues, personality issues, that it's really very complicated and it changes with every election.
Fifth election.
And we'll see what happens in the sixth. It doesn't look, I mean, everywhere you read it, they say it's probably, there could be something that happens we don't know about. But everywhere you read, so what we could see is that if some of these parties, these guys right here, if these parties came right together, they would have 13, 20, 28, 45, 51, 58. All the non-religious parties got together, they'd have 58 without Likud, and they would just need to pick one of the Muslim parties and they could get it in. They would win. That is almost surely not going to happen. Stuart didn't know.
Actually, no, was.
Oh, no, sorry. Because I have this on, I only have a small group of people on.
Rabbi?
Yes.
We spoke to our friends.
What happened to no?
Oh, no, sorry, go Jeff. We'll go no, and then Jeff, and then Stuart. Or no.
Yes. What is the situation about people having jobs? Are there no jobs? Are there some jobs? Or is there a priority for certain people to get jobs? And how are they managing to live and get food and medical care and things such as that?
Good question. The economy sometimes is the central focus. It is not right now because despite what's going on, the economy has been okay in Israel for the last couple of years. Jobs are always an issue, but Israel right now has been doing pretty well considering. So that is an issue. I mean, if there are no jobs, then that would be one of the main issues, or if the economy was failing. That has happened before. That happened in the 90s. And so, but their economy has been much stronger since. So, but it goes from issue in the early 90s. What was the issue? It was the Russian Olim. You had 1 million Russians coming into the country, and they were all eventually voting as a bloc. You can imagine how much power they had when they were a fourth of the country. But now they vote. Now, a generation later, the Russians are voting with whatever party they like, and that unity is kind of left. So, Stuart, and then Jeff, Jeff.
Or either of the Arab parties, the parties listed as Arab, do either of those have a religious characteristic, a la the equivalents of the Haredi and among the non-Arab parties in Israel?
They are all religious, but they don't have they don't have the we want money and stipends and not work stuff. That is not generally a part of the Arab Muslim world. The radicals don't have this. Remember, this don't work thing is basically just something that's been created over the 70-year history of Israel. So it was not in existence before. So, and again, if all they wanted was money, they probably, that would probably be great. The Likud would be like, you want money? We'll give you money. Yeah. Just let us do whatever we want with the territories and don't ask for emancipation and we're good. But obviously there's a lot more they want than that. But if their center, what may happen is Likud again may go to them. He's so right that he is probably going to be seen as okay to go to these guys. We'll see.
Rabbi?
Jeff.
Okay. We spoke to our friends in Israel and, they're very much into it like most Israelis are. And we had a discussion. There's also a movement underway in Israel. I don't know how strong or how close they are, but they want to change the election system by raising it from 3 to 5% in order to be able to have seats. That would throw 22 seats really back into contention, and the parties would have to reform once again in order to, be effective.
Right. And they've tried to redo the process before. In the 90s, they went to a system where you vote for prime minister and a party. They thought that was going to help, and it made things worse.
Yeah, right. It made
a lot worse. Larry.
Yeah, I just saw on that same note. I just saw on one of the lists there that they just changed it from 2 to 3.25%. So apparently they did that pretty recently. That's almost sounds like some of the voting rights kind of things that we've been going through.
Right, but you can also see how things can get around that. If Meretz loses its seat, the voters will just go to Yesh Atid. They'll go to another left wing, so it'll still stay in the same block.
Yeah, on the majority vote, though, supposing, let's say a government is formed, they've got 61 votes, is everybody then obligated to vote for that particular bill as it comes in? In other words, then are you assured, in other words, we have our situation today with Joe Manchin, let's say, in West Virginia, where he, even though he generally sides with the Democrats because he's independent, he has become almost like the swing vote, where he
Right.
can determine the 50th vote in the Senate. Now, do sometimes the Likud, do they vote totally as a party if they form a government with the other 31 members, the 30 plus the 31? And
Yes, you have, when it comes, yeah. I lost you. With specific issues, you can vote against. I mean, you get your own vote for specific issues. But when it comes to creating the party unity government, it's not. It's the entire party has to go along. So when you put your name on that list, you are saying that Netanyahu speaks for me as to who's going to go in the government. Like, I can't say I'm Likud, but I want to vote for Yesh Atid in elections. That I can't do. I have to leave Likud.
But if Yesh Atid, let's say the 17 members of Yesh Atid want to stay with Likud, do all 17, in other words, is it the majority of Yesh Atid?
They all stay. Yeah. For the purposes of forming a government, yes. Yesh Atid, yeah, they have to follow the platform. However, what happens all the time is, I don't like what my Likud's doing. I'm going to leave and form my other party.
Mhm.
And I'll leave before the election, and I'll take my votes with me.
Oh, before.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
That happens at every election. I
Yeah,
get mad at Larry because I don't like the direction you're taking our party. I think we should, drive Hondas instead of Toyotas. I'm going to start my Toyota party, and I'm bringing Noel and 3 other people with me. Ron.
The other question is, how do
Oh, sorry.
the government still operates? I mean, the country is still running. They're collecting
Right.
taxes. They're still paying the military and the civil servants, and the buses are still running, so to speak, picking up the garbage or whatever the government
Is continue. Yeah, that's
There's
on
no
the.
government.
That's like on the emergency government will continue to do that. We'll do that from the previous election year a while back until they vote again. Yeah. So that all those things get done. It's kind of like what we do when we go into emergency things.
And is there a certain amount of time now that the president has before he can say, okay, I'm going to allow Likud to, it looks to me like Likud has got the best chance, so we're going to give them the opportunity.
Yeah, he will say, you've got this amount of time. I think it's is it 3 weeks? It's less, but they usually know before that. They know probably before the time's up, and they'll say, listen, we can't do it, or he'll say, no, you didn't do it, and then he'll give somebody else the chance. Stuart.
I think also pursuant to what Larry was asking, when you have part of a party start to vote in the opposite way, that's when you tend to get this call for a vote of confidence, and the vote falls. Even though the term is supposed to be X years, I don't recall how long it's supposed to be, the whole government can fall apart, and that calls for a new election. So this coalition has a certain amount in the sense of being tender. It not only has to be formed at the beginning, but it has to be maintained throughout the election term of the election. Is it, Rabbi? Is it 3
Absolutely.
years? Or not?
Would you say something?
I just said it's absolutely right.
If the government doesn't fall, is the term of till the next election 6 years?
It's 4 years. So, but it can't be done. It can't be something like we're a party of 8. So we are blue and white. So we're blue and white, and we were elected as blue and white. Once the election starts and we're in the government, let's say we're in the government, I'm in blue and whites. I don't like Larry's our leader. I don't like what Larry's doing. I leave blue and white. That doesn't mean blue and white goes to 7. Blue and white stays at 8. It just means whoever's number 9 on the list is now in the party. So I can leave the party whenever. It's just, it doesn't affect the party in terms of its numbers. If I leave before the election and start my own party and people vote for me, that does make a big difference. That's when but once the election starts and you're on that list, if you want to get off the list, you can get off the list, but it doesn't affect the numbers of that party at all.
But within the party, you can have argument about changing the order of the list.
Oh yeah, exactly. That
results in the call for new government. So if the Likud decide.
No. I don't think that can bring down the government. I have to check that. It won't lessen because we've already got the votes. It may mess around with the order and who's in and who's out. I think though, I have to check into that.
I meant take down the government in the sense that Likud ends up internally to say, okay, Netanyahu's not here. Now Likud loses its unity in some sense, and the government falls because they are no longer voting as a bloc. They don't have no one has the power to replace rebel members, let's call them.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
That's essentially what I meant.
it would depend on what's going on. If Netanyahu is knocked out of Likud, the prime minister, and that would create havoc. But if the number two person is knocked out, they would just replace him. You just go 3 would be 2. But then the coalition's already been set. And there may be issues like, I'm in a different party and I want Stewart, who's the number 2 of Likud, and you're my buddy. And Larry, who's number 1 of Likud, says, Stewart, you're out. And then I'm in another party. I say, Larry, if you kick Stewart out from your party, then we're leaving the coalition. And then the government falls. So that means Larry has to keep Stewart as number 2, even though you hate each other. And that happens all the time. It happens all the time where the number 1, 2, and 3 in a party don't get along, but they have to stay together for various reasons.
You know, the system that we're probably most familiar with as parliamentary system is the British system. They, of course, have 2 houses, the Lords and the Commons. But generally, in the British system, as I understand it, you are actually voting for a member of parliament. Again, it's a small country, but you're voting for a member of parliament rather than the party, right? And then
I don't know. That's
Yes,
a good question. I
that's
think
correct.
so.
yeah, but here you're saying you don't really know who's on the list.
You know the list. You see the list when you're voting.
The order of the list.
Right.
You are voting for the party, but in a sense, you are voting for a person in that party based on the list as it's published for
Right.
that.
But you don't know if your person's going to get in. A big difference though is England is a tiny place in terms of how big it is, but there's 140 million people versus 8-9 million. I mean, it's a huge difference. They have, Great Britain has large groups of areas with millions and millions of people. So it makes a big difference that you can have this type of, any other questions before we?
I was just going to say, in England, Larry's right. It is sort of a reverse, because you vote for who's going to be the representative in Commons for your district. And then the power of the party becomes by having enough people elected. Israel is the opposite. You vote for the party and the representatives come in. And I think you're exactly right, Rabbi. That has to do with the nature of geography. There's not sufficient geographical difference in Israel to really split it up into meaningful differences. Splitting Israel up into 120 districts would leave districts with 3 people. Yeah.
And also, you're right. There's not that. I mean, there's difference, but the difference isn't always locale. It's more cultural. It's more religious.
Right.
It's more where your ancestors come from. I may be more connected to people where my great grandparents came from than the next door neighbor. So, right. There's a lot of differences. And again, there's nothing wrong with the system. It's always how things work. They could never have foreseen that it would be this divided, and that the Arab parties would ensure that neither one could get 61, because by taking 10 or so seats, that means you don't need to get 61 out of 120. You have to get 61 out of 110 now, which is a lot harder. And so that's what's happened a lot. It was smart. I mean, they finally decided, hey, we need to vote in droves, and we're now going to be almost, 10% of the vote. So at some point, some side is going to get desperate and say, I want to work with the Muslims. And then that invisible wall is going to fall and everybody's going to want to work for them. And inevitably, the Arabs' lives in Israel are going to get better for it because they're going to say stuff like, I want better electricity. I want better cable. I want Wi-Fi for my whole area. I want my house to have the same construction as Israel's house. So if you're asking for what you deserve, which they do, and you're not saying, I want Israel to fall, or I only care about the West Bank, eventually one of the sides is going to smart up and say, we need them. And so the Arab, I mean, I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just going to say it's going to change the system, Larry.
What is the Christian population in Israel, and do they have a party as well?
They don't have, I don't think they have a party right now. If they did, it's a very small percentage. And they do get to vote. If you're a citizen of Israel, you get to vote.
Yeah.
But I don't think they've had Christian parties, I believe, before, but it's just a very small percentage. And also Christians are not there's no real issue that really affects them as it does with the West Bank. I mean,
Well, the one issue that came up in one of the discussions I just saw on the Jewish Literacy Center because they had a Muslim, a Christian, and a Jewish, was this issue of protection of, let's say, monuments and things of that.
Yeah, that would be
monuments, and that became kind of an issue, and of how much money goes into that kind of things.
And that would be the issue for Arabs as well. So again, it's a very convoluted thing right now. Behind closed doors, people are meeting with each other, trying to get what they need or what they think they can get. And who knows what's going to happen, but the last couple elections, they've been pretty good at predicting that we're going to have another election.
Could you take an excursion for a minute and talk a little bit about the couple of recent Supreme Court decisions in Israel about marriage?
Why don't we do that? We can do that next time. I have to go run an errand real
Sure.
quick because I forgot to do something.
Oh, no problem.
But we will talk. We can talk about, if you guys want to talk about the Supreme Court decisions in Israel next week and how it affects marriage and other issues.
Yeah,
We can talk about that next time.
Yeah.
So what you also have to remember is think about America in 1962 or 61 or 60 or 64, 65. You have these legislations that deal with civil rights, and judges are saying this is the law. But once you have the law, what do you have to have next?
Enforcement.
Enforcement of the law. And there is a divide sometimes between that. So that's what we'll end on this time, is there's always been a slower enforcement of certain laws in Israel because the court is very, very separate from the politics, much more so than in America. And so they often are going against the grain. So, well, always a pleasure, guys. So next week we'll talk about legislation in Israel that has nothing to do with the political process, because we did that a little bit today, because we're going to be talking about this political process in a couple of months again. And what we talked about today will have absolutely no validity anymore. So everybody stay safe. I got to go put my car.
Stay safe, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
You guys
Be
stay
careful.
safe.